Hello and welcome to the Northwestern Biosafety and Biosecurity Mentorship Program. So I'm Alan Musonda. I'll take you through the most part of the sessions for this mentorship program. So this mentorship program applies to all laboratories that are handling biological agents. So it can be medical laboratories or any type of laboratory that is handling biological agents. So mostly we'll look at areas of implementation and not really the theoretical part. So I'm going to present some materials that you can use in order for you to implement a system, as well as in order for you to implement any type of area that you'd want to improve in your laboratory. So one of the areas that we'll look at is how do you create your documents, because we know documents are one of the most important aspects that you need if you need to implement either a management system or anything in the laboratory. Then we're going to look at areas such as risk assessment. So we're going to touch risk assessment. Then we're also going to look at trainings. How do you conduct a training? And lastly, we'll look at other areas that you need in order for you to review your overall biorisk management program. So we're going to look at how do you do your management review. So mostly that will be like our last session. So keep up with us, and then hopefully by the end of the sessions that we'll have, you'd have had some form of idea on how to implement a biorisk management system in your laboratories. So our first session for this program, we're going to look at the overview of biosafety and biosecurity. So in this module or in this session, we're going to look at what is biosafety and what is biosecurity, and what areas do you need or what elements do you need if you need to implement a biosafety and biosecurity program. Then later on in this session, we're going to look at the different standards that you may need in order to implement a biosafety and biosecurity program. So we'll look at least 4 major standards that are applicable to the medical laboratory as well as any lab that is handling biological agents. So we'll look at the ISO 35001, we'll look at the ISO 15189, then we'll also look at the CWAs, which is the CWA 15793, as well as the CWA 16393. So let's get into it. So by the end of this session, you should be able to define what biosafety is and what biosecurity is. And then also you should be able to define what biorisk is and what a biorisk management system is. Then you should be able to explain the AMP, which is the Assessment, Mitigation and Performance Model for managing biorisks. Then you should be able to explain the key factors for establishing and implementing a successful biorisk management system. Then you should be able to describe the checklist or checklists that are used in relation to biosafety and biosecurity. So we're going to look at some regional checklists as well as some national checklists. Then also you should be able to describe the standards used in biorisk management. So by the end of this session, at least you should have some idea on all these 5 key areas that are part of the learning areas in this session. So let's look at some definitions. Of course, we can't just start the conversation with without at least knowing what biosafety is and what is biosecurity. So, but then in this case, we're going to stick to laboratory biosafety as well as laboratory biosecurity. So what is laboratory biosafety? So according to the Laboratory Biosafety Manual 4th edition, 2020 edition, or 2020 version, biosafety is or are the containment principles, technologies, and practices implemented to prevent unintentional exposure to pathogens and toxins and their unintentional release. So by definition, that is what biosafety is. So in short or in simpler terms, when we talk about biosafety, we are simply just looking at all the principles that you can apply in your laboratory so that you prevent unintentional exposure to the biological agents that you're handling, or the toxins or anything that may lead to harm to you. Then also we are also trying to prevent the unintentional release of these particular agents as well as the toxins. So that's the simpler way of saying it. Or in a layman's term, we can say biosafety mostly looks at protecting you, the person who's handling the biological agents, from these biological agents. So you're protecting yourself from the biological agents. Then what is biosecurity? So biosecurity, these are policies, principles, technologies, and practices implemented for the protection and control of and accountability for biological material. Also, accountability of technology and information or the equipment that you have in the lab. Then also you're looking at the methods and the skills and data related to their handling. Then also, biosecurity aims to prevent intentional or accidental authorized access to and loss, theft, misuse, diversion or release, or even weaponization of such commodities. So in short, what we're trying to say is in biosecurity, you are looking at the policies, principles, and anything that you will do in order to protect the biological materials or the technology that you have in the laboratory, or any type of information that may be sensitive information, or the equipment that may be of importance to you, and anything that is related to handling these particular assets. So in biosecurity, mostly we're trying to look at the prevention of intentional or accidental authorized access to these materials, or the loss of these materials, or the theft of these materials, and or the misuse of these materials. Then also we're trying to look at how do you prevent intentional diversion or release, or even the weaponization of certain type of commodities as well as materials that you may be handling in the laboratory. So you're preventing harm, or you're preventing intentional release of the biological agents as well as anything that may be valuable to you in your laboratory. So in other words, we're saying biosecurity is you are protecting the materials from the people. Remember, in biosafety, we are protecting the people from the materials. But then in biosecurity, we are looking at the protection now of these materials from the people, but then also we are trying to look at the intent that may be there from the people to actually release these biological materials to harm people, and as well as to harm anyone that they want to harm. And of course, the definition of biosecurity was gotten from the laboratory biosecurity guidance from the World of the Organization. So let's look at what are some measures that may be considered as biosafety, and what are some measures that are biosecurity, and which of these measures can be considered both biosafety and biosecurity. So under biosafety, some measures that we can think about or we can talk about as falling under biosafety are examples are engineering controls. For example, if you're using a biosafety cabinet is a biosafety measure that mostly we use in our laboratories to prevent exposure to the biological agents that we are handling. Then also, if you have an anteroom, also that is a biosecurity or biosafety facility measure. Another example of a biosafety measure is good laboratory practice. For example, if you practice hand washing every time you enter your lab or after you leave your lab, that is a biosafety measure. If you have a spill management protocol or procedure, that is considered as a biosafety measure as well. Last but not the least, and not really the only three, is personal protective equipment, or PPE. So if you put on PPE in your laboratories to protect yourself from the biological agents that you're handling, the PPE that you're putting on, for example, your gloves, your lab coats, you've got your cargoes, your boots and everything, those may be considered as biosafety measures. Let's look at the biosecurity examples. So under biosecurity, we have your passwords for data. So if you have your computers in your laboratories or in your organization that contains certain information about your biological agents, the passwords for the data in that particular equipment or computer may be considered as a biosecurity measure, because you're protecting the access, you're preventing the unintentional or the intentional access to this particular information, or any type of technology that you may have in the computers. You're preventing the intentional access to this particular information. So another example is having a security guard. So if you have a security guard at your facility, the security guard is an example of a biosecurity measure that you can have. Locking doors, so if you have doors that are lockable in your laboratory, all that is a biosecurity measure. Then if you have magnetic locks or finger prints biometric systems, all those are examples of biosecurity measures. So examples of measures that are both biosafety as well as biosecurity, we have access control. So if you have access control in your laboratories, for example, you have your passwords, or you have the fingerprint biometric lock systems, what you're trying to do there is you're preventing people from walking into the laboratory and getting the biological agents that you have in your laboratory. But also, the access control will prevent people from just walking in and unintentionally getting exposed to the biological agents that you're handling in the lab. So the access control is acting as both as a biosafety as well as a biosecurity measure. Another example is inventory of biohazards. So if you have an inventory of your biohazards, it means that you have proper accountability of your biological agents, and therefore if someone was to steal or to divert any of these biological materials, you would know that someone has stored these particular biological agents, and therefore the inventory is acting as a biosecurity measure. But then if you also account for whatever you have in your laboratory, it means that you know where the risks of this particular exposure to this biological agent is, and therefore people may not necessarily have access to these particular areas, and therefore if they do not have access, it means that they can never get exposed. So the inventory is also working as a biosafety measure. Proper shipping of specimens. So if you are properly shipping your specimens, so either in your facility or between facilities, if you have proper chain of custody, for example, it means that you know the hands, or you know the people that would have handled these particular agents from the time that they were transported to the time that they were received by the receiving lab. And therefore, in that way, you're making sure that there's no stealing, there's no diversion of these particular agents. Then also, if you're using proper triple packaging, for example, it means that you would prevent the spilling or the spilling of these particular agents whilst they're being transported. And if you are preventing that, then also you are trying to see that to it that no one gets exposed to these biological agents, either intentionally or unintentionally during the transportation, and therefore it's acting as both biosafety as well as biosecurity. So these are just some examples of biosafety, biosecurity, as well as which ones are falling both in biosafety and biosecurity. So there are a lot more other examples. These are just some of the examples that we can give for biosafety measures, biosecurity, and those measures that are falling in between. So what is biorisk? So let's now try to look at what is biorisk. So we've already defined what biosafety is. We've defined what biosecurity is. Then we've looked at some examples of both biosafety and biosecurity. And now we want to see what is biorisk. So biorisk, by definition, is the risk that is associated with biological materials. So this risk that is associated with biological materials can either be biosafety risks or can be a biosecurity risks. And mostly when it comes to biorisk, the two major risks that are involved are biosafety and biosecurity risks. Therefore, in rephrasing the term, we can simply say biorisk is a combination of your biosafety and your biosecurity risks. Simply put like that. So biosafety and biosecurity risks is equal to your what? Your biorisk. So if you need to put up a biorisk management system or strategy, it means that your strategy or system needs to involve your biosafety measures as well as your biosecurity measures, because your biosafety measures will counteract your biosafety risks, whilst your biosecurity ones will counteract the biosecurity risks. And therefore you need to have a combination of both your biosafety as well as your biosecurity control measures for you to achieve or to attain a proper biorisk management system. So let's look at a certain model that is used to have a biorisk management. So we call this the AMP or the AMP model or the AMP model. Of course, with the A standing for assessment, the M for mitigation, and the P for performance. So this model can be likened to a three-legged stool, with the three legs being the assessment, the mitigation, and the performance, whilst the biorisk management is what sits on top of the three legs. So if you have a stool, you're going to have three legs and where you're going to sit on. So what you are sitting on is your biorisk, whilst the three legs are your assessment, mitigation, performance. But then let's look at it from this way. So the assessment, mitigation, performance is what supports your biorisk management system. So this biorisk management system sits on top of the three legs of this particular stool. So now imagine if one of the legs goes missing or is removed. It means that your biorisk management system cannot sit anymore, and therefore it will not balance, and therefore it will fall. Or if you need to sit on a stool, for example, and then you have a stool which has two legs, it means that you will not be able to balance and you would fall. But then if you have the three legs on this stool, then the stool will be firm, and therefore whatever will sit on top of these three legs is going to balance well. And therefore the assessment, the mitigation, and the performance all need to be there in order for you to have a proper biorisk management system. If any of the three is missing, it means that there is an imbalance, and therefore your system, which is supposed to sit on top, is not going to balance well, and therefore you are going to have a failed system that you want to put in place. So this concept can be used anywhere where you need to either implement or to set up a management system. So it can either be a biorisk management system, or it can be a personal management system, it can be a quality management system. This AMP model applies in all aspects of your daily lives as well as all aspects of your work. So let's look at the AMP in detail so that we try to understand what is this assessment, what is the mitigation, and what is the performance. So let's look at the first component of this AMP model. So we're looking at the assessment. So what is biorisk assessment? So before you do anything in your laboratory, the first thing you need to do is you need to assess. You need to assess what risks you have in your laboratory or organization. And this assessment is what we're calling your biorisk assessment. And remember, we said biorisk is a combination of biosafety and biosecurity. And therefore, if we say biorisk assessment, we simply mean that you're supposed to do a biosafety risk assessment as well as your biosecurity risk assessment. And what exactly are you doing in this particular part? So biorisk assessment is a process of identifying the hazards and evaluating the risks associated with biological agents and toxins, taking into account the adequacy of any existing controls and deciding whether or not the risks are acceptable. So what do we mean by this? So when you're doing a biosafety risk assessment or a biosecurity risk assessment, the first thing you need to do is identify the hazards. So you need to look at what hazards are applying to biosafety and what hazards are contributing to your biosecurity risks. Then after you look at the hazards, mostly these hazards will be biological in nature. If we're looking at the biorisk assessment, of course, in the laboratory, there may be multiple types of hazards. You may have your biological hazards, you may have your chemical hazards, you may have your physical hazards, you may have your fire hazards and the like. But then when it comes to biorisk assessment, mostly what we want to concentrate on are your biological hazards or agents. So after you identify the hazards, then you look at what are the risks. What are the risks that are associated with working with these particular hazards, which are biological in nature, because we've already defined they are biological in nature. So what are the risks of working with the biological agents that you have in your lab? What are the risks that are associated with working with your toxins that you are maybe working within the lab? Then after you look at the risks, you then go back and try to see, okay, what are we doing as a laboratory to make sure that these risks that we have identified that are pertaining to these agents or these hazards, what have we done to control these particular risks? Then after you look at what you've done, you say, okay, so we have the hazards. We've also looked at the risks that are associated with these biological types of agents or toxins or hazards. Then we've determined the risks. And then now we're saying, okay, what have we done to control? So by control, I mean, what have we done to either reduce or eliminate these risks? Then you say, okay, so what is this risk telling us? So is this risk something that we can accept or not? So if it's something that you can accept, of course, you need to do something about it. And then if it's something that you cannot accept, you also do something about that. So there are two courses of actions that you need to take in this particular point. So when you're deciding whether the risk is acceptable or unacceptable, you look at other factors that we're going to look at when we start doing our risk assessment. So if you find that the risk that is associated with working with these particular agents is unacceptable, it means that at this point you need to either reduce or you need to eliminate the risk that is associated with working with these biological agents. So therefore, you move to the next leg of the AMP, which is the mitigation. So under mitigations, what you're trying to simply do is you're trying to put up actions and control measures so that you reduce or eliminate the risks that are associated with the biological agents and toxins. So in risk assessment, we identified the biological agents or the hazards. Then we identified also that the toxins. In this case, if you are handling any toxins, then you are saying what are the risks that are associated with working with these biological agents. But then before you say, is the risk acceptable or not, you are considering whatever you've put in place to either reduce or eliminate the risk. So after you've considered what you've put in place, you are saying, is the risk acceptable or not? So if the risk is unacceptable, you put up measures that will either reduce or eliminate the risk. So in this case, there are a lot of measures that you can put up. So, but then remember that we're doing a biorisk, we're trying to set up a biorisk management system. Therefore, the measures are going to be biosafety in nature as well as biosecurity, depending on the risk itself. So if the risk is biosafety in nature, we put up biosafety risks. But then if it's biosecurity in nature, we put up biosecurity measures. We put up biosecurity measures to either reduce or eliminate the risk. So after you put up the measures to either reduce or eliminate the risk, you then need to check whether or not the measures that you've put up have either reduced or eliminated the risk. So it depends on what type of measure you put up. So if it's a measure that is supposed to reduce a risk, you check whether or not the risks that you identified have been reduced. Then if it's a measure that is supposed to eliminate the risk, you check, has this particular measure eliminated the risk? So now how do you check? So now this is where we go to our performance. So under performance, what we're trying to look at is have these particular mitigations that we proposed or that we've implemented, are they actually reducing or are they eliminating the risk? So under performance, we're improving biorisk management by recording, measuring, and evaluating organizational actions and outcomes to reduce biorisk or to eliminate biorisk. So you are measuring something that will tell you whether or not the risk that you calculated in the initial phase has been reduced by your actions that you've put up. So you're measuring something there. Then also you're trying to determine what is the impact that these particular measures have put, or the measures, what impact do they have now on this particular risk? So as this risk is reduced, or as this risk being eliminated in this particular case? So there are a lot of indicators that you can actually monitor that will tell you something about whether or not your risks are reducing or are being eliminated by your actions. For example, your incident management will tell you something about whether or not your risks are reducing or they are being eliminated. Because if you had a lot of incidences where people were getting exposed to these particular biological agents, so if you were having a lot of them in the initial phase, and then after maybe a few months or a few years, and then now you start to check your incidents and you find that your incidents have reduced, it means that you've reduced the chances of people getting exposed to this particular agent. And if you've reduced the chances of people getting exposed, it means that you've reduced the overall risk. So we're going to understand how the chances as well as some consequences affect your overall risk when we start doing our risk assessment. So that's just one of the areas, or one of the things that you can use to check whether or not your risks are either reducing or being eliminated. So that's the AMP. So now let's try to look at what a management system is. Then after that, we're going to look at some elements that will contribute to you having a strong management system. Then after that, we'll look at some ways you can check whether or not you have a proper management system. So a management system is a set of interrelated elements used to establish policy and objectives and to achieve those objectives. So this is a general term for a management system according to the CW 15793. So now what is a biorisk management system? So a biorisk management system, this is a system or process to control safety and security risks associated with handling or storage of and disposal of biological agents and toxins in laboratories and facilities. So system or process that you put up that is both biosafety and biosecurity, but then what you want to do there is you want to reduce the risk that is associated with handling the biological agents. So basically that's what a laboratory biorisk management system is. Of course, this was gotten from the CW 15793. So it's one of the standards that you can use if you need to set up a biorisk management system. So now let's look at the key elements of a management system. So what are the key elements of a management system? So these key elements apply to any type of management system, not only the biosecurity or the biosafety, or in short, the biorisk management system. So these key elements can apply to your quality management system. It can apply to any type of management system that you want to set up, or you want to implement, or you want to put in place. So there are 4 main key elements if you need to set up a management system. So we have top management commitment being 1. We have document and document control, 2. Training and staff awareness, that's 3. And number 4, we have planning, goals, and objectives. But then for you to have something that is communicating to each other and is strong, it means that you need to have what we call teamwork and communication. So teamwork and communication will link all the 4 key elements. So top management commitment, document control, document and document control, training and staff awareness, planning and objectives. So all these 4, if you implement them, you need to have something that will link them together and make sure that they are working together. Therefore, in this case, you need to have what is known as teamwork and communication. So I'll explain that later on. So let's look at top management commitment. So under top management commitment, one of the key things that you need to put in place, or you need to ensure in order for you to have a proper management system is that you need to have support from your top management. So what do you mean by top management? So top management can either be the management that is from the laboratory. So you may have a laboratory management. Then if you are coming from an institution where you have management away from the laboratory management, in this case we're talking about your facility management, then those will also be part of your top management. So you need to have support from the key people in the laboratory. So if you are a safety officer and you need to implement a management system, which is a biorisk management system, it means that you need to have backing, you need to have support from your laboratory manager, because your laboratory manager will be the person that will mostly communicate your goals and your vision as a safety officer to the other people that may come in and support your goals and visions. And maybe they may come in with some resources. So these resources may either be a monetary type of resources, or human resource, or any type of support that you may need, so that you have what you need to implement your biorisk management system or program or process. So top management is very important. Top management needs to know and support what your goals and objectives are as a biorisk management officer or biosafety and biosecurity officer. So let's look at documentation and document control. So for you to have a system or a management system that people can understand and be able to do it the way you as a person who has that vision and goal, the way you want it to be, you may need to have some form of standardization of how things are supposed to be done. And the only way you can standardize things is if you have your standard operating procedures or your documents. So one of the main things, or one of the first things that you need to implement if you need to have a management system is you need to put up, or you need to create documents. So you need to have, for example, you need to have your manuals. So the manual will communicate your overall plan as well as your overall policy as a laboratory. And after that, you need to have your standard operating procedures, your SOPs. Then, of course, you need to have your forms. So forms that will show evidence, or that will aid in making sure that whatever is either in your manual or your SOP is actually being done. So the forms will guide, or they will aid in actually making sure that your policy in your manuals and your plans in your manuals, as well as whatever procedures are in your SOPs, are actually being recorded. It's the forms that will mostly guide that. But then if you have the documents and then you do not communicate what is in the documents to the other staff or the other members of staff or the top management, or you don't communicate what is in your manuals or SOPs, it means that the goals and the mission as well as your objectives will remain with you, and people will not understand what you want to achieve. And therefore you need to communicate what is in these manuals, or what is in these standard operating procedures. So the best way to communicate what is in the manuals, what is in the SOPs, what is in the forms, is by you doing some form of orientations or trainings. So trainings, this is where now you are communicating what the standard is and what is expected of either the members of staff, and what is expected from your top management. Therefore, training and staff awareness comes in very handy after you've done your document creation as well as your document control. So training, very important to make sure that people understand what is supposed to be done and what is the plan and what is the goal and what is the objective. Of course, you need to have your planning. You need to plan what you want. So you need to know what do you want, what do you need to do, and what do you want to achieve. So therefore, after you do your planning, you need to now know what are your goals. So what do you want to achieve? And then what are your objectives as well? So what steps do you need to take in order for you to achieve your goal? So in this case, you need to have all this information, or you need to have all these elements put together, so that at least everything is flowing together and speaking to one another. Like we saw, the documents were speaking to training, as well as the planning and objectives will also speak to training, because through the trainings you can also communicate what your goals are and what your objectives are that you want to achieve in this particular management system. But of course, without top management, you can have your top management commitment, you can have your documents in place, you can have your goals, objectives, but then if you do not have the proper teamwork as a laboratory, and if you do not communicate what you need to do at each particular point, your management system will completely fail. Therefore, the fifth key element in this place is the teamwork and communication. So this teamwork and communication will strengthen all the 4 key elements that we've talked about, because if you do not communicate what you need to top management, they won't know what you need to buy, they won't know what gaps you may be facing, they won't know how to help, and therefore you need to communicate what you need and everything. And the only way you can communicate what you need is through your documents. So therefore, the documents will come in play to communicate or to help you communicate what you need to do. But then what you need to do also comes from whether or not you've planned. So if you have not planned and you don't have goals and objectives, then you won't have anything to tell people to say this is what we need to do. But then if you're telling people what you need to do and you want people to understand what is supposed to be done, mostly you will need your training and staff awareness. So therefore, all the elements will speak to each other in one way or the other. So basically, that's what the key elements are meant. Or that's what this slide is just trying to tell us, to say these are the key elements of a management system. Okay, so let's look at the requirements for safety implementation. So what do you need? What requirements do you need in order for you to have a basic biosecurity management system, or your biorisk management system? So one of the things that you need to put up, or you need to put in place, is you need to have a safety officer. So you need to appoint a safety officer, or your biosafety and biosecurity officer. So this officer will then be responsible for the safety program, and therefore they will be responsible to make sure that top management knows what is supposed to, top management knows what is needed, and top management knows what the goals and objectives are. Then the biosafety and biosecurity officer also makes sure that the documents that are supposed to be either created or customized or are supposed to be in place are put in place. Of course, we're not saying that the safety officer is the person to create the documents. We are saying they are responsible to make sure that these are put in place, and therefore they can appoint other people to actually make the documents, and also they can appoint people that can do the trainings and the like. But of course, the powers for the safety officer to appoint or to do the trainings, they will need some form of powers for them to do that. And mostly this will come from top management. So top management will give the powers to the biosafety and biosecurity officer, and therefore the biosafety and biosecurity officer will carry out their duties with full support from top management. Then if you have the numbers and you are able to create a committee, you need to appoint a steering committee. So in this case, you need to have a biosafety and biosecurity committee. So the committee can have as many people as you want. If you have the numbers, you can have 10 people. If you have the numbers, you can have 20 people. That's okay. But then if you do not have the numbers, 2 people or 3 people, that's enough numbers for you to say you have a committee. So the main goal of the committee is to make sure that whatever goals, plans, and objectives that you want to communicate or to have, the committee will make sure that these are actually actualized and also they are actually done. So the committee will sit, obviously. So you need to be sitting as a committee. Either you can be sitting every month or every 2 months. So depending on how convenient it is. So you can sit as many times as you want. But then whenever you sit, you need to look at what are the plans and what have we done to make sure that the plans are actually being actualized. And therefore, if you look at that, you look at the gaps that you are currently having in the management system itself, and therefore you plan for the future so that you improve the system, in short. So the committee is very important in making sure that the overall system is driven towards where it's supposed to be driven. Then you need to develop documents. So you need to have manuals, you need to have program plans, you need to have your standard operating procedures, as well as your forms that you may need to support your SOPs. But then after you develop your documents, you need to implement whatever is written in the documents. And for you to implement what is in the documents, people are supposed to know how to implement, and therefore training staff in biosafety and biosecurity becomes the next step that you may need to do in this place. So one of the key documents that you need to have is your biorisk management procedure. So how do you do your biosafety risk assessment, and how do you perform your biosecurity, biosafety and your biosecurity risk assessment? And then after that, you need to then implement what is written in this document. So you then need to perform your biorisk assessment. So you need to perform both the biosafety risk assessment and your biosecurity risk assessment. Of course, after you do your assessment, you need to communicate to the members of staff, as well as to top management of your findings from your biorisk assessment. Then you need to also look at what gaps do you have. So what gaps are there in the system in relation to, of course, maybe a particular standard that you may be wanting to implement from. So you need to conduct internal audits and perform corrective action. So during the internal audits, you check whether or not you are meeting certain requirements from a particular standard or from a particular document that you may have created. For example, if you have your manual, you may want to check whether or not you are actually doing what you are supposed to do in accordance to your manual. Or you may have other standards that you may be looking at. For example, you are looking at your ISO 15189 or your ISO 1590, and then you're trying to see, are we actually meeting the requirements that are in this particular standard? And if you find that you're not meeting the requirements, you then put up your action plan so that you actually meet those requirements. So in your action plan, you put up the corrective action or your preventive action that will make you actually meet the requirement from this standard. Then you need to meet on a regular basis to monitor progress. So as a safety committee, if you have a safety committee, you can meet on a regular basis. That way you are monitoring whether or not you are on point with your plans, your goals, and your objectives. So basically, these are some of the requirements that you may want to put up or to implement. Some people that you may want to appoint and everything, if you need to have a basic biorisk management program. Okay, so now let's try to look at what are some of the ways in which you can check whether or not you are meeting certain requirements from some of the standards that are available. So we'll start from the basics. So we'll look at the basics of quality management systems. So under the basics of quality management system, we have 12 quality system essentials. So if you need to actually implement a quality management system, you need to implement these 12 quality system essentials. Of course, these are interlinked, and one does not work. One quality system essential cannot stand on its own without other quality system essentials. So these are interlinked. So you need to have your organization, you need to have your personnel management, documents and records, you need to have some non-conformance management, you need to have process management, information management, equipment and inventory management, assessment. You need to do your assessments as well as your audits, Then you need to look at your customer focus. This is where you're checking whether or not you're meeting the satisfaction that your customers are supposed to have. Then we have got your facilities and safety, and then we have your continuous improvement. So these are the 12 quality system essentials. So, but then of importance is the facilities and safety. So facilities and safety is one of the 12 quality system essentials. So now what that means is that if you've managed to implement your facilities and safety, it means that it would contribute to your overall quality management system, and therefore it can now speak to the other types or the other system essentials. But then if you do not implement it, it means that the other system essentials will not have where to fall on. So they will not stand alone without you implementing the facilities and safety. And therefore, facilities and safety is one of the most important quality system essentials. Not necessarily saying that the others are not important, but it's one of the most important. So without it, there are other quality system essentials that may not actually be implemented to the fullest, and therefore it or they will rely on the proper implementation of the facilities and safety. So now, how do you check whether or not you are implementing all the 12 quality system essentials? So you can use some checklists. For example, we have the SLIPTA checklist. So the SLIPTA checklist is used mostly to check all the 12 quality system essentials. So it has 12 sections, and each of the sections corresponds to one of the 12 quality system essentials. So if you need to check whether or not you are doing or you are meeting the requirements under documents and records, you need to check section 1, for example, and check certain requirements that the checklists will ask, or certain questions that the checklist will ask. So if you answer mostly the yes to these particular questions, it means that at least you're meeting the requirements for this particular section or this particular system essential. So of course, there are other sections that are corresponding to the other system essentials, but to us, mostly under this particular program, we're interested in the facilities and biosafety section. So that is the section number 12. So if you look at the section number 12, it has a total of 43 points. So for you to score the total number of 275 points, 43 of those points will come from the facilities and safety section. Of course, the other sections will have 35 points. For example, equipment has 35 points. So equipment is the second largest section, then followed by process control. Then you're going to have I think your documents and records. Then from there, maybe you've got your purchasing and inventory, and then maybe your information management and the like. But then facilities and safety has the largest point score in this particular checklist. It means that if you score all the 43 points in this section or in this checklist, it means that you've contributed towards you scoring the total 275 points. So this checklist, you can also use it to assess at what level you are in terms of implementation. Of course, it will give you some levels in terms of starring. So it will give you stars. For example, if you score 0 to 150 points, it means that you have no stars. And if you score above 151 but below 177, you have 1 star. Then above 178 to 205, that's 2 stars. Then 206 to 232, that's 3 stars. 233 to 260, that's 4 stars. Then the highest star is 5 stars, which is above 261 points. So the overall, or the main aim of using this checklist is that we want facilities or we want laboratories to actually score 5 stars, and therefore if you score 5 stars, it means that you may be recommended for accreditation using the SATCAS type of accreditation body. So, but then if you score the 43 points in facility and safety, you are one step closer to achieving your 5 stars, and therefore you need to make sure that you implement everything that is required under the facilities and safety section. So let's look at another checklist, which mostly is concentrated or mostly will speak to biosafety and biosecurity, and then it will not speak to the other quality system essentials, so it will mostly just speak to biosafety and biosecurity. But then if you score you score good, like you score almost all the 259 points in this checklist, it means that you scoring the 43 points in the SLIPTA checklist is going to be easier, because this checklist is a bit more comprehensive as compared to the section in which the facilities and safety is. So this checklist will look at almost all the key areas that you need to implement your biosafety and your biosecurity management system. Then not only that, it will also look at other areas such as your chemical safety, your electrical safety, as well as your fire safety and radiation safety. So this checklist has a total of 259 points, and then this is the checklist that is mostly used if we need to look at how good the facility is scoring, or how good a facility is implementing biosafety and biosecurity in relation to some standards, for example, the ISO 15190 as well as the 35001. But mostly it will concentrate on how are you implementing in relation to 15190. So what are the classes or the starring? So for this one, mostly it uses classes and not stars. So if you score 0 to 138 points in this particular checklist, or you score below 55 points or below 55%, it means that you have no rating. And then if you score 139 to 165 points, that is between 55 and 64%, you are going to be classified as a Class D facility. Then if you score between 165 to 192 points, or between 65 and 74%, you're going to be classified as a Class C. Then if you score between 192 to 218 points, or between 75 to 24%, you're going to be classified as a Class B facility. Then if you score between 218 and 245 points, or 85 to 94%, you're going to be classified as a Class A facility. And then the highest class you can score is a Class A+, which is 245 to 259 points, which is above 95%. So the aim is for facilities to actually score the 95% and above. So you may start from a no rating, but then as you are trying to implement, or as you try to implement, you may be increasing the classes that are possible. So you may start from a no rating, but then if you constantly check whether or not you are actually implementing what is missing, or what are the gaps that you identify every time you do either your internal or the external audit, you'll find that you keep on going up until maybe you reach your Class A+. So this is a checklist that you can use to check whether or not you're actually implementing what some of the requirements are in the ISO 15190, as well as your the 35001.